Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. Stephen, where are you? My wife yelled outside, and I heard it from deep in the yard. Camille walked down the path. She saw her husband standing there with a shovel. She was surprised. It was too early to dig anything. When she came over, she realized what was going on. She smiled. Finally, she'd been asking him to clean out the cesspool for ages. Do you know how long that Stephen's been with a bandage on his face? It's no big deal. It'll give you a decent toilet. She went up to him and kissed him. The woman had wanted a restroom outside for a long time. There was one in the house too. But when a large company gathered outside, it was uncomfortable to go indoors. And here on the street, everything was at her fingertips. And now she was glad her husband had listened to her. In the morning, Stephen looked out the window. The shovel was right up to his eyes. Called to him to take it and work. He had long promised Camille that he would make a toilet outside, but all hands did not come to it. And it was unpleasant that stood small and old, and a shriveled house. He gathered his thoughts, got up. He thought that today he would do everything. There was nowhere to put it off. He went out into the yard, took the tools, and headed for a small wooden structure. It took some puffing, but he got it sideways. But let's get going. He put gloves on his hands and set to work. It was hard, but the man tried. When the job was half done, Stephen decided to take the waste cart to the dump. He climbed out, looked at himself, wondered how he was going to get on. But then he waved goodbye and drove the cart down the path. He came back, jumped off again. The work continued. Suddenly, the shovel hit something hard. Stephen tried next to it, but it was the same there. But the ground can't be that hard. He said to himself and poked the shovel further and harder. But nothing came out. Camille, Camille, come here. He shouted in the direction of the house. What? Not a few minutes later, the woman was here. Look, the man poked with the shovel in several places, and a banging sound was heard. And what's there? Did she look at her husband in surprise? Treasure laughed. Would he say what she was smiling about? All right, go now. I'll get it. I'll call you. Stephen sent his wife back. Still no help. The man began to fumble for the end of what was here. It turned out to be quite a big thing. Stephen huffed and puffed and tried, but there was nothing he could do. So he dropped everything and went into the summer shower. There he quickly removed a layer of dirt from himself, put on another robe, and went after his neighbor. Hello, Christopher. He approached the fence and saw the man chopping wood. Hey, come on, I need some help. He called out to him. What you got there again? Christopher did not refuse, but went reluctantly clean the cesspool today and found something. Started to explain to him the treasure, just like Stephen, suggested the neighbor. I do not know, but also told his wife was a cheerful man. They went into the yard. What a smell you have here, the neighbor grumbled. Nothing, you'll get used to it. He led Christopher to the pit. Wow, looked at the find, Christopher. Would you like a change of clothes? The owner looked at his companion. He went to the barn and took out Christopher's old clothes. When he changed his clothes, the work continued. But the two of them couldn't get anything out either. The box, or whatever it was, it wouldn't budge. I'll go get Sarioga. Christopher looked at his neighbor. Yeah, just take off your clothes, warned him Stephen. Yes, I just to the fence did not want to waste time, friend. He himself is already interested in what could be there. Sergei came to the rescue very quickly. He was already in his work clothes. Christopher warned. The three of us worked together. With a shovel we managed to pry a little, and the friends picked it up with hints. Now all that was left was to get everything upstairs. The neighbors were all out of daub. Their hands were slipping, but they were getting closer to the goal. When the big box was on the ground, the men looked at the find, and each began to sketch out ideas. What could it be? A coffin, it looked like, said one. You say the same thing and it gets scary. So the soul's over there, not here. I'll take care of things here, Stephen commanded him. He went to the fence, took off the hose, untwisted its sweat, connected it to the water. The strong jet immediately began to wash away the dirt and everything else. The further the box became clean, the more Stephen became convinced of his friend's words. It was indeed a coffin, but not a simple one, but a zinc one. When the friends returned, they opened their mouths. They stood there like a dumbfounded man staring at the find. "Is it like this?" asked Christopher. As you can see, Stephen did not know what to do or say next. He went to take a shower just like the others. Work was definitely over for the day. Stephen called out to his wife when she came out to look, aghast and crouched down. "Stephen," she was the one who spoke softly, her voice shook. "Can't you see it?" He came up to her. "I can see, but how, from where?" Camille cried. Stephen and Camille had long dreamed of buying an apartment. They chose it very meticulously. The couple had only recently met. Both had a marriage under their belt. Children, but no love. They saw each other and there was a spark between them. "Camille, are you in love?" her friend asked her. When they met again, "You have no idea." She was shocked. The woman looked at Emily. "Where did you guys end up?" The woman didn't understand. "I'll tell you. You won't believe it." Camille smiled modestly. "You're not Camille anymore." Emily made herself comfortable and took a glass of wine in her hands. They had a certain day for meetings. Then the girlfriends put aside all their business and went to the countryside. Tanya had a small dacha there, and all day long they just sat, drank wine, and talked. "You know, I never spend money just like that." She started her story at home. "And what does this have to do with it?" My friend was surprised. And that day, everything went wrong for me. I was going to work in the morning. I put on my tights on the way out and noticed an arrow. I looked at my shoes. I couldn't even put them on without tights. I was disappointed. Camille sat in the chair across from me. "So, I went to the store and met him." Emily was trying to guess. "No, look, I just wanted to get the story straight. I put on my old sandals that were comfortable without pantyhose, and I hurried to work. Of course I was late. It couldn't have been otherwise." She drank a little from her glass. "Couldn't wait to climax." Emily. The day went on as usual at the end of the workday, and I turned everything off and left the office. When I went down the stairs, caught my heel on something and flew down. Emily took a dip at this point and made big eyes. "And he caught you." Again, she inserted her assumption. "Either you're listening or I'm not telling." Camille was offended. "All right, come on." She begged for her friend's back. When she got to her feet, she realized there was a slight sprain. I didn't have on sandals. The heel was off. And then I'm on these unfortunate steps. And then he showed up on a white horse and saved you. Emily's already a bright chilo. "All right, I see you have your own stories, and you're not interested in mine." Camille went to fetch the joint. "Come on," your friend followed her. "No offense, you just tell everything in such detail." She caught up and gave Camille a hug. They went back inside, sat back down in their seats. "I'm crying. How do I go home?" "I don't know. I see a cab nearby." I got excited, but then I thought it would cost a lot of money. She put her finger up. "That's what economical has to do with it." Her friend smiled. "Yes," agreed Camille. "And the driver saw it and got out of the car and is coming in my direction." "A prince," I said. Emily laughed. "Okay, let it be so." I did not argue with her, Camille. "And what next?" My friend waited. Continued. "He came over, asked me what I could do to help. Showed him my swollen foot and heel. He smiled. Then he helped me up and led me to the car. I didn't resist. We got in. Stephen started talking to me, and I sat there. His conversations gave me goosebumps." Camille blushed and looked at her friend. "Did you feel it right away?" Emily was not laughing now. He admitted later that he'd had the same thing. Camille said, "But wow, You invited him over. Did your friend get curious? I wanted to, but I was shy. We drove to my house. I got out, and she couldn't get on her feet. So he ran out, gave me his hand, leaned on it. From the perfume that I felt, I became so that I almost lost consciousness. He took me to my apartment, and he's looking at me. And I can't figure it out. What he wants. We laughed later about the fact that he was waiting for payment. Camille laughed. God, how romantic. Emily stood up and added wine to the glasses I didn't dare to invite. Thought we'd never meet again. Fed myself, and the next day got ready for work, pulled my leg. I put on my comfortable shoes. I went out, and he was standing at the entrance. The woman blushed again. He came for money. I guessed my friend thought so too. And he came out, inviting her into the car. He opened the door. I said I'd walk. So Stephen insisted, said it was a gesture to help without paying. Camille was quiet for a second. She remembered something. So that's how you met. Emily concluded instead. You could say that. After that, he came to pick me up in the evening. Then I told him to come up for tea. There at the table and got to know each other normally. Now together while we communicate, but he calls to move to him. She put the glass on the table. That's interesting. And they say there are no coincidences. Emily was silent. After the dinner, Camille told her friend to come and visit her, to introduce her to Stephen. Emily could not miss such an opportunity, so she agreed to come. They agreed on what day it would happen and went home. Stephen was warned about sitting with a friend, so did not bother with calls and questions. When she was already at home, she dialed him. Hi. She was still embarrassed. It's young people getting to know each other, going out, texting, and they're doing the same. I was expecting your call, he said, so his voice gave her goosebumps again. Come over. She called him to her place every time because she didn't want to meet on his turf. I'll be there soon. He hung up. About that he began to cook. Stephen, as promised, came over. Their evenings passed monotonously. First, they would sit at the table, drink tea or wine, and then move to the room. There they'd watch a movie, talk. But it never got any further than that. And then one day Stephen came to Camille. Why did you say that? I don't get it. She was supposed to be visiting them today. Emily, can't I wear a suit? I couldn't understand. He's getting ready to meet my friend. The woman smiled. You could say that. I want to look my best, Stephen admitted. Good, she would be home soon. Knew that Emily was never late. And indeed, at exactly 19 o'clock the bell rang. The hostess opened the door. On the doorstep stood her friend. Hi. She handed her a bottle of champagne and a box of chocolates. Come in. Camille let her through, and Irina entered the kitchen. At the table sat a handsome man. She smiled at him and said hello. Camille told me about you, he said to her. What didn't she tell you? Emily smiled and looked at her friend. Nothing bad, only good. Stephen offered the woman a table where she sat down. This evening was a little more fun than usual. Emily told various stories that had happened between her and Camille, and that's when her husband left her. She got to this point. Please don't. Then I put my hand on hers. Okay, I'm sorry, please. I won't do it again. Emily stopped talking. Did your divorce go badly with him? Stephen asked. In principle, everything is fine, but I do not really want to remember these moments, especially in front of you. She raised her eyes to the man. Okay, if you don't want to, then it won't happen. Stephen was ready to do anything to make only this woman happy. Afterwards, they went to see Emily off, and on the way back, Stephen offered to sit on a bench. Why? Let's go home. Camille asked him. Wait. He waited until she sat down. Then he took something out of his reward pocket, got down on one knee, and handed the woman a ring. Stephen, you're sure at home all the time. She was embarrassed about her age. Never more so, he said. He took her face in the palms of his hands and kissed her lips, On the soul became so joyful that inside everything trembled home, happy. Will you stay? Camille asked her suitor for the first time. If you let me, I'll stay. He told her honestly. That evening, they were serious. Camille knew she would give the man a positive answer. She sat in front of the mirror and looked at herself. Yes, 45. But she wasn't old yet. She began to smooth her face. I should have told the children the news. We were afraid of how they would react. Evelyn's son had long since graduated from college and was now living and working in another city. More recently, he had a family. Her daughter had also enrolled and was pleasing her mother with her grades. Camille called first her son and then her daughter. She invited them to visit. The daughter was due this weekend, and the son said he'd be there too. That's when she'd introduce everyone and talk about getting married. Stephen, don't you want to invite your offspring? She called him the next day. They won't go with certainty, he said. What makes you think so? The woman was surprised. That mother decides everything for them. His voice was sad. I understood. Don't be upset. She wished him well and hung up. Everything was fine. On Saturday, the brother and sister met. Mother was all dressed up. Mom, what's going on? Jenna was the first to arrive. You'll find out tonight. She was laughing, happy. The kids had never seen her like this since their father left. What kind of secrets? Went Jenna to her room. Evelyn entered the apartment, and what a delicious smell. He sniffed the air with his nose. Hi. Camille came out to see him. Wow. He raised a finger up in admiration. I tried. The mother hugged her son. Afterward, a friend came in. She knew she would introduce Stephen to the children at home, but nothing about the proposal. Who are we waiting for? Let's go to the table. I'm really hungry, the young man said. Let's wait another minute, his mother asked. She kept looking at her watch. And who are we waiting for? He asked longingly to everyone who was here. Where's your wife? His mother changed the subject. She has no time for work. The daughter and mother-in-law answered all the questions at once. Good. That's all, she said as the doorbell rang. Camille got up from her seat. Her cheeks were flaming. She walked over, opened the apartment. A man walked in. Meet Stephen. She introduced him to the children. Jenna walked out to him. The girl Evelyn shook the young man's hand. It is a pleasure to meet the children of my favorite woman. Stephen was Dutch, and now we can go to the table, cheerfully said Camille. And they all went into the hall together. And you've been so quiet for so long. It's not the first day you've been together. The son looked at his mother and put the pie on his plate. I'm sorry, but I didn't feel comfortable. I was embarrassed or something. And yesterday, Stephen proposed to me. She raised her hand with the ring. She decided she couldn't drag it out any longer. Mommy, congratulations. Uncle Stephen, that's great. Her daughter came up to her. That's what I'm telling her. Emily backed her up. When's the wedding? Asked the son. I don't know. We haven't been anywhere yet. But if all is well, in a month. The woman burned and looked at Stephen. Yes, he agreed with his future wife in everything. They sat and talked about everything. The children stayed at their mother's. Stephen had to go home. He called Emily for a ride, and she didn't refuse. See you later, darling. Stephen kissed Camille's hand. Bye, darling, she smiled. Mommy, you're lucky. She and her daughter were sitting in the kitchen. I don't know how this could have happened. The woman replied. Does he have children? Evelyn joined them. Yes, but they don't communicate. Camille told them the secret. Too bad. Shook his head after everyone knew the truth. At home and at work, she informed about the upcoming wedding. She herself didn't understand why she was so embarrassed when she talked about it. She never took anyone away from her family, never cheated on anyone. What is there to be ashamed of? Camille, we congratulate you. Colleagues rejoiced, as did everyone else. You deserve this happiness. They hugged her. I invite you all to the wedding. She expanded. We will definitely be there. Agreed. Stephen and Camille applied. just as the woman had said they would. They were given a date in a month. Now everything had to be thought out and prepared. Stephen did everything his wife to be asked him to do. He went shopping, to the restaurant, to the atelier, because he realized that the woman already had a lot of problems. Everything was ready for the guests to get ready. It was the happiest day of Camille and Stephen's life. They were married. Now they had to decide where they would live. Camille's apartment was small, but it was close to her work and the center. Stephen's place was bigger, but it would be harder to get to. So far, they'd settled on the first option. The woman was comfortable here. She didn't have to get used to anything. Let's sell our apartments and buy one big and spacious one, the husband suggested to his wife. What's a good suggestion? She never even thought about it. Realtors called several times a day. They wanted to show the options, but the couple was not satisfied with many things. The old house is far away. The plumbing doesn't work and other things. You're so dismissive. It's like you don't want us to buy anything, Stephen told her tonight. You know, I really don't want an apartment. Let's buy a house in the country, she suggested. You what? What about work? He didn't understand her. Yes, it'll be a bit far, but nature, a sauna, and everything else, she said dreamily. Well, let's look at the options, said Stephen. Immediately dialed a realtor and explained that their plans had changed. By the time the cottage was found, the man's apartment had already been sold. He now had enough money to buy a house. You wanted to sell mine too? Camille wondered. Let there be at least some housing in the city, her husband told her judiciously. It's the right thing to do. Where would Jenna come? She agreed with him. Now Stephen and Camille drove through the villages and looked at the options that had been offered to them. This house has been empty for a long time, the specialist told them. I like it, Camille said. She went inside and looked outside, just as she wanted. The bathhouse, the vegetable garden. We'll take the outbuildings. You couldn't decide on an apartment for so long, and you bought the house on the click. Surprised the young man who offered them all this. I guess I just wanted it more than a concrete box, Camille admitted. If everything is perfect, we can do the paperwork, said the realtor. We're in, the couple said with glee. Camille took a vacation from work, wanted to do everything quickly, to move in now. The first thing the woman did was to get to know her neighbors. She went first to one and then to another. A week later, a housewarming party was celebrated in their yard. Of course, the house was not yet ready to move in, but she wanted to make people happy. I think you are doing well here, said Wendy, who was Christopher's wife. We hope so. Camille was sure. Stephen taped off the walls first, then started on the roof. Neighbors helped when they had time. And today it was down to the cesspool. And that's where Mom couldn't get over what she saw. She looked at her husband with big eyes. Shall we open it up? He asked. And what do you think the Ginny will come out of there? Christopher teased him. Yeah, bad idea. The man shook his head. But today he finished the job, put the wooden box in place, threw a tarp over what they'd found so as not to scare anyone. We should go see the old-timers. Maybe they know something. Camille suggested tonight. Tomorrow, I think everyone will know about the case. Will anyone find it themselves? Stephen said. They went to bed, but sleep did not come. They'd both thought about the terrible discovery. What else was she thinking? The man asked his wife. He wanted to get away from the sorrowful thoughts. We should bury it, Camille said. Yes, but first we have to find out what and how. He realized it himself, just as Stephen had suggested. The next day, everyone knew what he'd found in the cesspool. But whoever I asked at home about the former tenants, all they did was throw up their hands. I know I lived here. Big family, neighbor Wendy said. She and Christopher, like Stephen and Camille, just moved in. The police should be called. They were, Christopher was sure. Yeah, they'll definitely look into it. Stephen agreed with his friend. He didn't wait for other advice. He dialed a number and called the police. They came. They were told everything. In some places, they even went back and forth. You didn't open it. The officer asked. Of course not. Camille's eyes bulged. The coffin was taken away for identification and other matters. Camille saw the whole thing. She asked her husband to go into town for a few days to get away from the horror she had experienced the day before. Okay, as usual, he gave a positive answer. They drove to the apartment. All the way they talked about the fact that it could have been someone's son or husband. The only thing that was unclear was how he had ended up where Stephen had found him. You know, we're probably going to live here until it's all cleared up, he said to his wife. She didn't mind. Will you go there? Camille asked him. I'll go tomorrow. I'll see if I can find someone else. He was talking and thinking about something. Well, then I'll get on with work and other things. Tommy didn't even want to think about it. Stephen, as promised, packed up in the morning and drove to the place where they were already practically settled. He immediately went to Christopher's house. They'd first sat him down at the table to have breakfast. Well, it was quiet. Asked the guest of the hosts. Nothing. Spread his hands. Stephen pursed his lips in interest. You know, I was thinking, there are still villagers here. They live out there far beyond the village. They say there are old men too. Maybe you could ask there. Christopher suggested it. That's a good idea. I didn't even know where to start. Stephen got up and walked toward the door. If he needs help, he'll just whistle, Christopher told him in his back. As always, Stephen looked around and walked out of the house. He circled for a long time, asked the night roads, could not find anyone. But here in the distance appeared cottages. He got excited. And when he drove up, he realized he had done it for nothing. Almost everyone was in place. It was like no one had been here in years. Hey, what are you looking for? He saw a little grandma. Hello. I wanted to know something about the village. He pointed in the right direction. What's so interesting? It's Chagala. We recently moved in, did some remodeling. And then we found something. I'd like to know about the people who lived there before us, Stephen said. Let's go. She beckoned him into the yard. Behind the gate she stood. Thank you. He followed the old woman. They entered the gate. Stephen peered through the time-shriveled gate. It was obvious that no one had done anything here for a long time. There were huge, unpainted logs lying all over the yard. Maybe you should get some firewood, asked the old woman a man. Do you want to poke? Indifferently, she said. And the man took the colon. He took off his jacket and set to work. When there was enough firewood, at Stephen's glance, he finished and went into the house, where the grandmother had long since disappeared. That's it. Now you will definitely have enough. He sat down on a chair. And who will wash your hands? She told him sternly. Good. And where he looked, the wash basin, and nowhere was there behind the stove. She showed him to the curtain. The man got up, washed his face, and went back to his seat. Grandmother moved very nimbly about her kitchen. She put milk and bread on the table and took out the stove. Chukanov and potatoes. Here you are. Thank you. He couldn't wait to start eating. What's your name? A woman came to the bench and sat down. Stephen spoke in an open and friendly manner. I'm Vanessa. Grandma took a spoon. Thank you, pleasant. He started eating too. After work, it felt like hunger. So what did you want to know? Vanessa asked. You probably don't know. We went to a house that had been empty for a long time. And there it was. The man was silent. You mean Sirotkin? She asked a question. I don't even know. He looked at her surprised. Don't look. I used to live in that village too. I was their neighbor. She stood up, walked over to the sergeant, and pulled out the photos. What are these? He took the picture she held out to him. This is the family you're talking about. She poked her finger at a card. I don't know. Didn't notice the house at first. The three husband and wife and the grandmother were standing there. Bring it. Of course, she was younger then. And then the man saw that they were standing near the very house where Camille now lives. Examined it. The grandmother smiled. Yes, that's the house where we live now. Or rather, we're going to. He put the picture on the table. Oh, and a hard fate those people had. Who would have thought? When two young and healthy people came to the village, shaking her head. Do you know their story? Stephen was very interested in it. How not to know they were like children to me. The old woman was surprised. Tell me. He fixed his eyes on her. It's a long and sad story. It seemed as if Vanessa was going to cry. Of course I have to go to town to see my wife, but I also want to get to the bottom of it. He assured her he would listen to the end. So be it. I'll tell you what happened to Surikin. She got up, washed her hands, and wiped the corners of her mouth with a handkerchief. Then she came in again and sat down on the bench, put her feet up so that she was comfortable, and looked at Stephen. The village was prosperous then. We had everything. We worked, lived, enjoyed every day. Except that there were not enough hands in the collective farm. I wanted young people to come. But young people at that time didn't care about the village. They tried to manage on their own. And here was a joy. Two young men, John and Nancy, arrive at once. He's an agronomist. She's a medic. We welcomed them as honored guests. They were given a cottage, the same one you live in now. They were unmarried, so for almost 2 years we persuaded them to get married. Finally, they were ready. And John proposed to Nancy. Oh, what fun it was then. We had beer, kvass, wine flowing through the village, and the hors d'oeuvres were unprecedented. The old woman was silent. Probably she was remembering how they went out then. And then what happened? To be honest, Stephen was not very interested in the biography of young people. He wanted to get to the heart of the matter, and he was afraid to tell the woman about his find, in case he got sick. I was their neighbor at the time. Every day they came to visit me. We'd have tea, then they'd make pies for us. They were soulful people. She stood up and went to the table to pour herself some tea. Why were they? They are gone now, Stephen clarified. That I don't know. She had some tea after what happened to them. They lived for a short time, and then they left here, and I never saw them again. Grandma waved an unseen tear with her handkerchief. What happened to them? I wanted to find out quickly and go home. It's bad. Shook the old lady's head. Nancy, are you sure you want to live in the village? You're so young. A young man asked her. If they sent me from the institute, then I must go. She assured him. But all right. John and Nancy met when they were students. She was in medical school, and he was in agricultural school. And when John heard that Nancy had been sent to work in the country, he asked to go there himself. But now, when the time came, he regretted his choice. No, he continued to love Nancy, but he didn't want to live all his life in the village. Maybe work for a few years and get out of there. Asked at her. Well, once a few years have passed, we'll see, she replied. As soon as the chairman learned that 2 young people were coming to him, he immediately allocated them a house. The girl and the young man quickly settled there. They beat the walls or asked for the floors. At once it became cozy. They were sociable, so everyone in the village knew and loved them. Aunt Molly called Nancy the neighbor. Why did you turn around? To come and visit me. I have a pie from baking. The girl smiled. Molly gladly went. They sat at the table, chatting and drinking tea. At some point, the whole village started urging them to get married. But Nancy said that she was still young, and it was too early for her. And after 6 months, the girl felt that she was not alone. She told her husband about it. There was nowhere else to go. The wedding was to be held, and they celebrated it to the glory. And the simple life of 2 people living together began. Oh, Nancy was sitting on the sofa. Then her husband put his ear to her belly and listened as if there was not one baby, but a whole team. He spoke as he felt the drunks through the skin of her belly. You know, I feel like there's more than one baby in there too. Nancy confirmed his words. What do the doctors say? He asked her. Who said what? She wasn't going through anything very difficult. Nancy was pregnant, and when she had to give birth, she invited Aunt Molly in advance. And the other thing was she was a medical professional. She went to the nurse's station where she worked. "Why are you here?" Molly asked her when she got there. "I don't want to go to the city. It's far away, and no one close to you," said the girl. "Okay, as you know, we'll take the birth." "Not once already been," assured her woman. "Okay, I'll give you a hint if you need it." Nancy was so small, and her belly was coming to her forehead. When it started, the women raced in. Nancy breathed. She knew how to do things. "That's the right thing to do." "Push," Molly shouted, and the girl would start. Time passed very slowly. The pain was unbearable. Finally, the head appeared, and then the rest of the body. So the woman picked up the baby in her arms. A boy. The second woman took it from Molly Nancy. Before I could rejoice, the pain returned. "What's that?" The neighbor was frightened. The second Nancy exhaled. "God, it started again after a few minutes." And the second little boy was in the woman's arms. "You knew. Why didn't you tell me?" threatened Molly with a finger. All was well was powerless. The girl. The babies were washed and put next to their mother. "What are you going to name them?" "Did you think of one?" "The one who just delivered the babies." Robert and Nancy lay looking at their babies. Robert was mobile. He was roaring and active. Kevin, on the other hand, lay motionless. "What's wrong with him?" Nancy asked. Molly shook her head and told me. "Do you need an emergency checkup?" Nancy wanted to get up, but she couldn't. When it all came out, it turned out that the boy had been born disabled. He was just like his brother, except that he developed differently. Nancy cried a lot, and John was there for her, but there was nothing to do. She would never leave a coin behind, not since the day they'd been home. Nancy devoted all her time to Kevin. Of course, Robert wasn't without his mother's love either, but he could do a lot on his own. "Do you take such good care of them?" John used to say. "They're my blood." Mother held her sons in her arms. "Let me help." Husband never refused. When you needed his help, Nancy gave it to her husband while she sat with Kevin. The boys were growing up. Robert was on his way. Kevin was still sitting on his mother's lap. She went to the hospital, went to the witch doctor, took the baby to the doctor. Nothing. "I wasn't working." "Hang in there." The husband kissed his wife and left. It was hard, but Nancy coped with everything. And Vanessa helped her when she had to go to work. The girl couldn't. She wrote a letter of resignation. She had a disabled son on her hands. It was sad. People started coming to her home for her to see them and treat them, if it was necessary. "Robert, stop it." The mother yelled at her son when he molested his brother. Why was he pouting his lips? The kid. Often the boy had to stand in the corner for hurting his brother. Nancy took care of her son. She gave him massages, gave him medicine. By the time it was time to go to kindergarten, Kevin could already move around a little on his own. The mother rejoiced at her son's first successes. She kept at it. She drove him to doctors, practiced on her own. "Robert, get ready for kindergarten," his mother told him. She'd already dressed Kevin and was expecting her second son. "Why do you always dress him and not me?" The boy was offended. "Let me help you." She put Kevin in the stroller and came up to her son. After that, they would go to the kindergarten. Kevin would babble something in the stroller. After one son went to kindergarten, Nancy felt better. She had more time at home. She did laundry, ironing, doing Kevin's chores. Everyone who knew her in the village often came and helped her, some with clothes and food. Some even gave money. Nancy would refuse, but they would forcefully shove it on her. "How was your day today?" John would ask in the evening. He'd come when the whole family was gathered. It was all right. The girl would get up and kiss her husband. By the time the boys reached school age, their mother had decided to put Kevin in first grade. He could walk. His head was working fine. She put so much effort into the boy that she hoped for the understanding of the leadership of the educational institution. Let's see how he would behave, how the other kids would accept him. They didn't turn her down. John Kevin got into first grade. She rejoiced tonight. "Are you sure he'll do well?" Her husband doubted his knowledge. I got him up to speed. He's just as good as the regular kids. She marveled at John's mistrust. Robert and Kevin walked to their first bell on their own feet. Nancy was only a little supportive of her son. How worried was she when they first went to class? All day long, she sat wondering how her boys were doing, if they'd had a fight. They didn't fight. Mom ran out to the house. Robert, where's Kevin? She looked behind his back. He'll be here in a minute. He was laughing. Bro, what are you talking about? Where did you hear such a word? Mom was pissed. If the parents needed to go out or work in the garden, the boys were left at Molly's. She didn't mind. Who's going to school? The neighbor came over in the evening. We shouted together, the boys. They all sat down together at the table and ate a delicious pie, which the woman brought. Thank you. You always help us out, Nancy told her. And the woman saw how difficult it was. She hadn't started a family herself in her time. Now it was too late. Molly loved Nancy like a daughter, and her children were her grandchildren. John worked. The children were growing up. It now seemed that the family had been rebuilt. By winter, Nancy decided to go out to work. The residents rejoiced because they never found anyone for them. There was one doctor who came in from out of town. He only lasted 6 months. If you need anything, you ask right away, don't be shy, the neighbor told her. The girl was sure to thank her. John often went to the neighbor after work. She treated him to tea, and he cried in her vest that this time the woman sat at the table, on which there were sweets and gingerbread. Nothing in the stall was pathetic. He took a sip of tea, and what is there to pity her? Look, what a good girl. She got the guy back on his feet. Molly understood him, but she shouldn't be like him. I can't stand to see her doing all that. And then she'd come into the bedroom and drop dead, John said. It's understandable. It's not good for you either. She'd come up to him and stroke his head. It happened a lot. Nancy knew John went there, but she didn't say anything because she knew he was tired too. The man worked 2 jobs to keep money in the family. It's time. Let's go to the sea, have a vacation. He suggested it once. Now the boys are on vacation. We'll definitely go. She realized it would be very good for Kevin. And as soon as the boys finished first grade, they bought train tickets. Mom, how nice was it sitting in the sand? Kevin, yes, son. She looked up and saw John and Robert splashing in the water. Here the couple had a chance to spend some quality time together. Did you get any rest? John asked her when they had already gone to bed. Yes, thank you, love. She kissed his shoulder. Everyone went home on a positive note. There was a good mood. No one forgot about the neighbor. They brought her some shells and beautiful stones from the sea. But how she was already waiting for them at the gate of their house. The family was smiling. Robert was pestering his brother again. Calm down. The mother threatened them with her finger. A day later, she went to work. Molly was with the boys now. A month passed. Nancy sat in her office. Sam's grandfather came to see her. What's troubling you? She got up from her chair and became sharply dizzy. Nancy fainted. Daughter, what's wrong? He bent over her. She opened her eyes and smiled. Grandpa Sam answered her with the same smile. I should probably go. He got to his feet and walked towards the exit. Nancy didn't bother to linger here either. She was in a hurry to get home. What are you doing? Molly was surprised to see her so early. I think we're going to have another member of the family soon, said Nancy excitedly. Really? Rejoiced the neighbor. They sat down at the table, poured tea, and waited for John from work. When he came, they told him everything. It was very happy news. By the end of the summer, it was clear that Nancy was not mistaken, and she really was expecting a baby. It's gonna be a girl, Molly told her. How do you know? Nancy turned to her. Look at that life preserver. The neighbor laughed. Nancy was not feeling well now. She kept throwing up all the time, and it was hard to go to work, but she walked on. Her fellow villagers were again feeling sorry for her for being pregnant. The girl gave up badly. The cases looked sickly. What if she was sick again? Shared her fears with her neighbor. Not thinking about it ahead of time, advised the latter. John became more attentive to his wife. The boys realized that it was hard for their mother. They tried not to bother her with their arguments. They were quiet. Robert and Kevin were in second grade. Now that their mother was at home, Kevin was having a hard time. He didn't understand a lot of things about school, and the woman couldn't help him. John tried his best, but he couldn't do all those problems either. Stop yelling. You see, Mommy's not well. Sometimes John would go off on a tangent. He knew it was hard for Nancy to hear and see. The labor came on suddenly. It wasn't due yet. It frightened Nancy. It woke John up even more. He quickly ran to get Vanessa. Now it was just the two of them. John took the boys into the other room. No one slept that night. There was a painful moan. Nancy, oh, wench, to the hospital, you have a neighbor worried. The baby walked feet first. We'll make it. That's what Nancy was saying. She was talking, even though she couldn't. What do we do to make the raft capsize? Molly had delivered a baby, but she didn't have that much experience. She twirled her belly. Finally, the crash stopped her. It's starting, she shouted. So Kevin in the next room flinched and clung to his brother. No one kept track of time. But as it began to hover outside the window, a baby's crying sounded in the house. Well, thank goodness, exhaled John and hugged the children. The daughter came out of Molly's room. She was so tired, as if she had not delivered a baby and unloaded coal. How are you? The man peeked into the room. Good, nodded his wife to him. He walked over and looked at his princess and smiled. After that, Nancy began to blossom. She and her daughter, whom they named Miranda, took their sons to school together, started helping the children with their studies again. John saw that his wife was healthy. It was visible to the naked eye. The boys continued to study when they were in 5th grade. Miranda went to daycare and the mother went to work. From that point on, no one worried about anyone. How's Kevin doing? Did the patients who came to see Nancy ask? You know, the bigger he gets, the less his abnormalities are visible. She answered and smiled. It was a great thank you, and the happy locals left. Nancy was happy. Miranda made her happier every day. The boys, on the other hand, that's a different conversation. What have you done again? She dealt with them in the evening. It's okay that they call him names, Robert said. He always stood up for his brother, lest, God forbid, they beat him up and make it worse. I understand all that, but you have to be more careful. She pretended to be angry with them. We're sorry. As best they could, the brothers apologized. Nancy didn't expect anything bad to happen, so she forgave and kissed her blood. When Miranda had to go to 1st grade, the boys were already in 8th grade. That's where the trouble started. Robert got mixed up with a bad crowd, started doing all sorts of naughty things. And most importantly, he dragged his brother down with him. What do you smell? Mom asked me tonight. Mom, we're adults, Robert told her. She saw that Kevin was not well. He was standing and swaying. Son, what's the matter with you? Nancy was scared. I need to lie down, the man said. And then all night long the woman didn't sleep. Not only did she have to help her daughter do her homework, she also had to run after her sons and go to work in the morning. John, talk to them. She begged. The husband could only be whipped. He clenched his fists. Why go to extremes? Nancy didn't understand. You and your good nature will only make things worse. He answered his wife. I'm asking for your help. Nancy started to cry. All right, I'll talk to you tomorrow. He promised. Nancy hoped so. And then something happened that made the mother so sick, she ended up in the hospital. The boys were 15 years old. They were out for a long time that night. At first, the parents weren't worried. The sons could sometimes stay out late. But when it was 2 o'clock on the clock, mother and father were not on a joke frightened. Nancy went outside. She went and knocked on Molly's door. She was asleep, but she got dressed and went outside. "Shall we go for a walk in the village?" The woman asked her. "Let's split up," the neighbor suggested. "No, together first." Nancy disagreed with her. They walked on, knocking on all the houses where the lights were on, but there were no boys anywhere. They reached the end of the village where the quarry was, saw a fire burning in the distance. That was where Nancy had said to go. They rushed toward where the fire was flickering. There was Kevin lying by the fire. He was dead drunk. Nancy began to cry. The only thing he could utter was "Get up." She tried to lift him up, but she couldn't do it. Then Nancy looked at Molly. The latter came over, and together they managed to get the guy on his feet. A hand on the shoulder showed Nancy to the neighbor, instead of splashing around, because the guy, who was completely relaxed, was hanging on them now. They put Kevin on a bench a few houses away. She ran, went inside. She called out to her husband in a whisper, "What have you found?" He also spoke, because the daughter was already asleep. "Help me, please. He's sitting on the bench. Vanessa, and I just can't carry him anymore. It's very heavy," she whispered to him, and she was very nervous. "Okay, wait, just don't worry." He put something on his feet and ran out of the house. John easily threw the guy on his shoulder and carried him to the house. "Put him on the couch. He's drunk." He turned away from his son. "Yeah, he was. Where's Robert?" "It's unclear." The mother sat down next to Kevin and cried. "Why are you crying? They have their own head on their shoulders." John was already nervous about having a head, I know that. "But how old are they?" Nancy kept crying. "If he's not back by morning, we'll report him," the man said unequivocally. By morning, when Kevin woke up, the first thing he did was ask for water. "Where's Robert?" Nancy leaned over him. Robert was remembering what had happened yesterday. Robert, your brother, your mom was standing next to him. "Listen, yesterday we met the townspeople. They came to visit us in the village, asked us to take them somewhere to make a fire. So we took them to the quarry. They took bottles out of a bag and started serving them. I don't remember, but I think Robert went with them," Kevin said. "What about them? What town? What are you telling me?" Nancy ran around the room. She didn't know what to do, what townies where they'd gone, how many of them there were. She started packing. "Where are you going?" John came out to her. "To the police station," she said. "We gotta do something." Left with the town's men. She was already outside the gate when she saw her son. He was struggling to walk. His pants and shirt were torn and his face was bruised. "My God, son, where have you been? What happened to you?" She ran up to him. "Mom, I gotta go to bed." He was practically spelling it out for her. "What the hell is this?" She took him into the house and put him on the couch. "Kevin's here. That's all," he asked. Here, how did you get here?" She screamed and cried. Miranda came into the room. She looked at the brothers and could not understand what had happened to them. A few days later, a policeman came to their house. John himself was very surprised by his visit. He let the man into the kitchen. They sat down at the table. "Is Robert home?" the man in uniform asked then. "Yes, I'll call him right away." He entered the room. After that, the policeman told everything. "A few days ago, your son robbed the store with other guys," said the policeman. "That can't be true." Nancy jumped up from her stool. "All the evidence is against him." The precinct officer insisted. "What are we supposed to do now?" The woman didn't understand. "Pay the fine, and it'll all be over at once, or I have to take him away," said the man. "Okay, we'll pay everything," exhaled the woman. She didn't understand how such a boy could grow up to be a bully. Robert had gotten away with it then. But at home, his father had given him, as they say, the first number. If you ever lay a hand on another man's property again, you'll know what prison is. A man told him. "Yeah, I got it. The kid didn't look at his father, and he dragged his brother into it. You know he can't drink. Why don't you keep an eye on it?" Nancy wondered. "Mom, I got it." You could see that the boy was hurt and offended. After that, the brothers quieted down a bit. Kevin spent most of his time at home. Robert, on the other hand, was always doing something. Mother wouldn't leave the principal's office. Nancy started to get sick. She was dizzy all the time. No pills were working, but she wouldn't go to the hospital. She was afraid of what they'd tell her. "Nancy, what if it gets worse?" Molly admonished her. "Thanks for your concern, but I'll manage on my own." She gave the same answer to everyone. A woman. She was tutoring her daughter and trying to talk some sense into the guys. "What are we wearing to the prom?" the boys asked their mother. "Let's buy you suits," Mom suggested. All right. They were happy. Robert wanted to go to the city and work there after graduation. Kevin didn't know what he wanted to do. Mother couldn't insist, so she just gave advice. "Why do you want to go to the city? What's in it for you?" She cried in the evenings. "Everything can be earned there now to live well," her son told her. "And you?" She would turn to Kevin. "Why should I stay with you? I'll be helping out." He shrugged his shoulders, but his brother laughed at him foolishly too. He was one himself. He turned and took a swing at his brother. Nancy was so tired of all this arguing that she would just walk away and lie down. One day she had a seizure. They took her to the hospital. "And what did you accomplish?" the father asked his sons. "Let's apologize." Then Kevin said, "Don't let it be too late." The father sighed and left. Nancy was fine. She was on a drip, taking all the pills she needed. And as soon as she felt better, she came home. "Forgive us, Mom." Kevin came up to her. She hugged him and stood there for a long time. Miranda had been a quiet, peaceful girl all these years. She did well in school. There were no complaints from the teachers. Lately, she had become interested in socializing with her brothers. "What are you interested in with them?" her mother asked her once. "I don't know." Just shrugged the girl's shoulders. "Just don't go anywhere with them," the woman asked her. Why didn't she understand? Because not enough. And her mom hugged and kissed her. She had no problems at all with Miranda. She thought it would continue to be that way. Robert, just as he had said he was going to enroll in the city, was going to do just that. He was getting ready. Graduation was just around the corner. Kevin, on the other hand, was more at home. He was studying for exams. Miranda, hi. Her brother's friends came up to her. Hi. She looked at them. She liked them. "Come walk with us," the girl called out to her. Of course, she was sure she had nothing to fear with grown-up girls. "Where are your brothers?" asked the new girlfriends. As it turned out later, they specifically came to the girl to find out from her all the legal Kevin. But where was she to find out? "I don't know. She was walking around somewhere." The girl shrugged her shoulders. They went first were just in the village, and then came out of it. There was a forest ahead. Miranda walked up to one girl and took her hand. She laughed scarily. A little. She was only 9 years old. "Don't be scared. It'll be okay." They had already entered where the big trees grew. "They usually gather at the edge," one of the girls said. They started to make their way deeper into the woods. "I want to go home." Did Miranda look at the girls? "No, now we'll find the guys, and then we'll all go together. I'm tired." Miranda started moaning. "But don't complain." Pulled her back by one of her girlfriends. They went out into the clearing. Someone was heard there. There were voices. "Hello, everybody." An aunt came up to them, the bravest of the brave. "Oh, the girls are here." An unfamiliar young man turned around. "Who are you?" The girl looked puzzled. "And I'm just the man you need." He started to get up from the ground. His friend began to do the same. "Our guys are coming here now. They'll show you." Lisa spoke boldly. "Who are we?" He moved on her. The other girls stood a little further away. They didn't know what to do. "Yeah, fuck you." Lisa turned around and walked towards her friends. What grabbed her boyfriend by the hair. "Let go," she yelled. The girls went to the rescue of the girlfriend. Miranda saw all this. She was scared. She couldn't move. The girl cried out and ran wherever she was going. At that moment, a terrible thing was happening in the clearing. The one who had taken the girl by the hair piled her on the ground and went under her skirt. When the others wanted to stop him from doing it, the second one came up to them. "And what do you want there?" he said defiantly to them and pushed them away. "Let her go." Katya almost cried. "Yeah, she's got some fools." The comrade grabbed one that was closer. The girl shouted throughout the forest. Robert and Kevin at that moment appeared in the clearing, and with them several other friends. "Who are you? What do you want?" The guy grabbed the one who was already lying on the yell. "Don't you get it?" He quickly stood up and grabbed him by the pecs. The other girl was freed too. They ran out of here, and a fight broke out between the guys. They fought to the death. One of the strangers pulled a knife. All Kevin could do was yell, "Brother," but it was too late. He was stabbed in the side. The boys all piled on the assailants together. When it was over, Kevin was unconscious on the ground, and the attackers flowed into the woods. Those assholes. Robert looked after them. He tried to lift his brother, but he couldn't. "He's breathing," the boys asked. "I think he is." Listen to his breathing. Guy and felt his brother's pulse. At this time, the girls who were in school ran to the village. They didn't know where Miranda was, so they wanted to check whether she was home or not. When they were already at the gate, they didn't dare to knock or enter. What if she wasn't there? Katya looked on with frightened eyes. Why did they take her there in the first place? Lisa began to sway. At that moment, Nancy heard their conversation. She came out of the girl's house. "What's wrong? What's wrong with you?" She could see that everyone was scared. "Aunt Nancy, I'm sorry." We started crying. "Girls, what are you saying?" The woman felt her head starting to hurt. "Miranda is silent, Katya." "What Miranda? Where is she?" Her hands started shaking and twitching on their own. "We don't know. We thought she ran home." The girl came out sobbing. Jesus went back into the house, threw on a shawl, and put on Nancy's shoes. What happened? Went out to see her. Dusty was gone. Started crying. The woman quickly needs to look for it. He got ready too. All together, including Molly. They rushed towards the woods. They didn't go a few meters when they saw Robert and company. They were carrying someone in their arms. Kevin's mother fell on her knees in front of him. "Mom." Those scumbags had stabbed him. Robert was talking fast. "What's going on?" She looked up at her son. "He needs to go to the hospital," said someone from behind her back. "Quickly to the nurse's station," the mother commanded. The boys dragged him in. Nancy turned her sweater back to look at the wound, small but serious. She did as she had been taught. Kevin was in serious condition. It was necessary to go to the hospital. An ambulance was called. Miranda had to be found. She was in the same forest as the bandits. "You'll stay with him?" The mother asked her son. "No, let's do better." We suggested that a friend of the guys would be more useful in the woods. The company moved to where they had just returned from. Miranda was nowhere to be found. No matter how much the mother and the boys shouted, no one answered them. "Oh my God, where is my daughter?" Sitting down on her knees, Nancy began to sob. Her head ached more and more. It felt like it was going to split in two. "Mom, go home. We're on our own." Robert begged her. "You've already done everything yourself." She couldn't calm down. The search continued into the night, but there were no results. "We need to go home to eat and change," said John calmly. "How can you say that when your daughter is missing?" She was screaming all right. "Then we need to get a bigger group together." He understood everything, and just like his wife, he wanted to cry. Miranda shouted "Mother" at the top of her voice. But there was silence again. Nancy calmed down. She is probably very frightened and hiding. Took her by the shoulder by her husband. "Get away from me," again the mother shouted. Her husband picked her up and carried her home. She grimaced and scratched, but he tolerated it. The boys gathered more people and went to calm the woods. When Nancy had sedated herself, she went to the nurse's station, but no one was there anymore. Kevin was taken away in an ambulance. "John, please, let's go into the woods." She sat on the couch and cried. "Now, when the guys get back, we'll replace them." He showed her that there were still a few people waiting outside. Well, put her head down in her arms, wife. Time passed and Miranda was still nowhere to be found. Morning came. Everyone was exhausted, but there was nothing they could do. "Let's go." John took his wife's hand. Wherever they had been, about the scarf or every corner of the forest, but the girl was still nowhere to be found. What to do? Was she dead? Nancy asked. Horrible images came to mind, but the woman didn't want to think about it. It couldn't be. Her husband cradled her in his arms. The search continued. The boys screamed, looked under bushes in the trees. John dragged his wife home again. She was sick, passed out. She needed to rest. "And you," she looked at her husband. "And be back." He pointed to the woods well, and helplessly she fell on the bed. Nancy lay there and stared at the ceiling. She couldn't imagine what would happen to her if her daughter was gone. What if those scumbags caught her and abused her? She covered her eyes with her hands again and started crying hard. "Don't." Molly, who had just entered the house, approached her. "Don't." She screamed at the girls who were taking Kevin to the hospital. The woman was trying to keep her voice down so she wouldn't make it worse. "Where is he? What's wrong with him?" She jumped out of bed. "He's in the hospital. His organs were hit." Took her neighbor's hand. "I should be with him." She snuggled into Molly's shoulder and sobbed. "Yes, of course. We'll find Miranda and go," she told her. "And we'll find her." I couldn't believe it anymore. Nancy was sure of it. The woman was sure of it. They packed up and went into the woods as well. In doing so, Molly gathered a large bag of provisions to feed those now in the woods. "No," Nancy approached her husband. "No," shook her head. "But why? Why is this happening to my children?" screamed the woman. She was just walking down the path and saw a tree with a large hollow tree. Had Nancy passed through here before, or did she think she had? She smiled. She remembered how she and her daughter used to play squirrels and find a tree with a hollow tree. Miranda, because she was little, climbed right in it. She would bring her different leaves, mushrooms, berries. Then they chewed them on thin twigs and, like squirrels, prepared them for winter hollow. She stopped when she had already passed this tree. With all her legs, the woman rushed toward it. She caught hold of the edge, reached out, intercepted Miranda's branch. She saw the little girl sitting at the very bottom. The mother raised a tear-stained face. The hollow was such that it had no bottom. Either bugs or old age had made the trunk decrepit, so the girl just fell through. "Everybody in here!" Nancy started yelling. After a few minutes, she realized she couldn't hear her. Thought the daughter might have been yelling too, but she couldn't be heard. Nancy ran out into the open, folded her arms, brought them to her mouth, and shouted. John resounded over the forest. Everyone who was there rushed at the voice. "Scream!" yelled a man in response. "I'm here." She didn't stop. They found them quickly. The woman showed her husband where their daughter was. "They got her. You freed her from captivity. My little mama had a skinny little body come to her. She needs to go to the hospital. She hasn't drank or eaten in days," John said. "Yes, that's just where Kevin is," Nancy agreed. At that moment, something clicked in her head, and she started to settle down. Nancy was screamed at by her husband. Everyone drove to the hospital together. John, Nancy, Robert, and Miranda. They were worried about the mother and the girl. When they got to the clinic, Nancy was still unconscious. The woman put the girl in the operating room. "And look," said the doctor. John and Robert stayed in the hallway. Kevin was in the ICU, no way to get to him. All we could do was wait. "Your girl's fine. A little dehydrated, but it's nothing serious." The doctor brought her in. "I wanted to check with my wife. It's more complicated than that. Suspected stroke. He wasn't in surgery, so he didn't know for sure. We'll wait." The man said. "Should Miranda and I go home?" asked the guy. "Good job getting us the money for the tickets," he said. How much time passed? No one knew. Finally, a doctor came out of the operating room door. "Tell me, what's wrong with my wife?" John ran up to him. "Stroke." He lowered his eyes. The operation was a success, but the results will come later. John sat down on the couch again. He watched his wife being taken to the emergency room. His head was full. The man covered his eyes with the palms of his hands and cried. Now was the time to wait for her to come to her senses. There was no point in sitting here. Everyone is very tired. Go home, get some rest. You can come back tomorrow evening, the nurse told him. What if she wakes up and I'm not here? Asked the man. Don't worry, she's resting. Then John thought that there were children at home who were also sick. He packed up and drove there. He was very nervous. He had to hold on. It's like someone's jinxed you, Molly told him, who had already fed Miranda and put her to bed. You don't say, John agreed, even though he didn't believe it. They sat in the kitchen and were silent because there was nothing to say. I'm going into town, Robert said. Why? His father didn't understand. I'm going to live there anyway. They promised me a dorm. 2 weeks before school is only 2 days away. You're here with Miranda, and I'm there with my mom and brother. How's everything gonna be okay? I'll call you, my son promised. Okay, we'll figure it out tomorrow. Right now, everyone needs to get some rest. He ran his hands over his face. Nancy came to her senses headache. She lay back and smiled. It's okay. A young girl came up to her. And who are you? Still kept a smile on Nancy's face. I work in this hospital, she explained. I'm what? In the hospital, the girl saw that the woman was saying something strange. She went out into the hallway to call the doctor. He came in, examined Nancy. What's your name? Asked Nancy. She answered. Okay. Do you have children? He didn't care much about that. He just wanted to know if her memory was okay. Yes, 3. She was still smiling. Good. He made some notes in his notebook and left. Nancy lay down. She was staring out the window. Her head hurt. Hello, doctor. Can you tell me what's wrong with my mother? Asked Robert, who had just walked in. Greetings. I can tell you that she's mostly fine. She understands everything and recognizes everyone, but her condition is close to schizophrenia. If there's another event, she'll just go out of her mind. It wasn't exact, but it was very similar. So what do we do now? Robert was upset. You have to take care of Mom. She doesn't have to worry. Doctor's advice. Okay, I hear you. Can I see her? Asked the guy and was ready to leave. Yes, just gently advised the man in the white coat. The boy opened the door and ran to the room where the mother was lying. Hi. He sat down beside her and took her hand. Robert. She looked at him, Mom. Everything will be okay. He spoke in a calm tone. Where's Kevin? She asked him a question. He's feeling better now, too. Tried to get around the sharp corners of the guy. Is he sick? Did the mother raise an eyebrow? No, he's fine. Robert realized she didn't remember the knife wound. Then what does he feel better about? She was surprised. He's got a job. What do you say, son? I see. She leaned back on the pillow. Robert looked at his mother. He felt so sorry for her. It was all their fault that her head had gotten so bad. He fixed her blanket and went to his brother's room. Hi. He went into his room. Kevin was lying there all pale. It was obvious that he wasn't feeling well. Hello, he said and cringed. Every movement was painful. How did you come? Brother, the beds are closer. Normal Kevin squeezed out of himself. Mom came to her senses. She's feeling fine, he told his brother. Robert just nodded and went to the dormitory where he lived. On the way, he wondered why all this was happening to them, but nothing came to mind. So where do you disappear all day long? His friend asked him. My brother and Mom are in the hospital here, he answered. The truth. I see. You're good for not leaving them. His neighbor praised him. Robert went to the hospital every day. He helped his mother to get up. They'd walked for a while. Then he'd go to his mother's house to feed her, take care of her as best he could. Sometimes his father and Miranda came. They too did everything they could to make sure their relatives were cured and home as soon as possible. Finally, the doctors said that both of them could only be taken away by Kevin, but could not do anything heavy about Nancy worrying. Otherwise, it would be even worse than it is now. Nancy, John, Kevin, and Miranda came back to the village, and Robert stayed behind to study. But things would be different now, Nancy assured everyone. She was really in over her head. She was always asking, what before? She was forgetting the most basic things. The doctor said that's what happens when the brain refuses to remember something bad or related. Okay, sweetie, just don't worry. Her husband would come over and hug her. Nancy, while she was at home, Kevin got a job at the village hall. He did practically nothing there. He sat at a desk and filled out paperwork. But it keeps him busy all day. No time to do anything stupid. John decided to make his son comfortable. Sit down at the table. I've made a pie, called everyone to the table. Molly came too. She felt sorry for the woman. Oh, it's delicious. Everyone enjoyed the flavorful. Robert came once a month with her. There was no time and not much money. But when he did, Nancy would throw a party at home. Robert kissed her. She kissed him. I got a summons. He took a piece of paper out of his pocket like a summons. It started to settle. Her husband was there. He managed to pick her up. This time, it was all right. She didn't even lose consciousness, but looked more carefully at her son. And do what? Robert noticed his brother looking at him. Go into the service, unequivocally, said John. And the send-off. The son looked at his mother to see how she would get through it. It'll be fine, his father promised. Good. Then we need to write an application to the technical school. He was ready for that. Maybe they'll let you take the exams early, assumed the parent. I'll find out, Robert realized. They sat at the table, talking. Nancy cooked and served her family a variety of dishes. Nancy, are you feeling all right? John asked her that evening. Yeah. Why? She turned to him. Are you ready to give your son a send-off? You won't faint, fall down, and die. He was interested. I'll try. She wasn't sure she would. After that, John went to Vanessa and told her everything. Asked if she would help. The woman was perfectly fine with it. Now everyone was waiting for the summons to arrive. Kevin had to pass the examination and provide the military enlistment office with the data that he was not fit. The young man was worried about his brother. Now conscripts could easily be thrown into a hot spot, but Kevin did not say anything out loud. He, like the others, just kept silent and prepared for the send-off. Mom, I'm here. Kevin came home the next night. Are you at it again? Saw on his nightingale eyes. And that a little cannot. He asked, are you sick? The disease could reveal itself at any moment. She was crying. It's nothing. As it opens, it will close. Kevin was sure of it. He was working. The pay was small, but it was there. It turned out that in a year Kevin had saved up for a motorcycle. When his parents found out, they were shocked. How are you going to ride it? Screamed his mother. It's fine. The kid was sure. He didn't listen to anyone. He had his own opinion on everything. And even his mom couldn't change his mind. Miranda also began to walk always with her brother. She was like his ponytail. What do you like about him? Mom asked. Yes, she answered. I don't understand the age difference. What are you doing with them? The mother lamented. We're just socializing, the girl explained. Okay, but you mind your own business, the woman asked. I do. Miranda couldn't listen to this lecture anymore. Okay, Robert will be gone soon. What are we going to do without him? She began to lament in the evening. He doesn't even live with us now. Her husband came up to her. He was afraid of her attacks, but he's in the next town. We can come to him, just like he can come to us. She made her arguments. There's nothing we can do. The husband sat down next to her. Okay, we have to do it, said the accident, and stood up. Kevin was very upset about it. No, not because his brother was going into the army, but because they wouldn't take him there. Why was he considered sick? But he studied together with everyone else at school and did everything together. And now when you go to war, it's Robert. He's not. The day came when I had to gather my friends. The weather was beautiful outside, so they decided to gather outside. Tables were set out, which Molly and Nancy set up. The guys came in. Everyone wished something for their friend, but enough of the admonishment. Tired of it, Robert. He'd just met a girl. He wanted to tell her how he felt, but he didn't. He thought he'd be back when he got back. Son, right. His mother used to tell him. Of course, he would promise. The party lasted till nightfall. The friends didn't want to leave. The girls cried. John watched it all from the gate. He didn't understand how it was. Time had passed quickly. Not long ago, his children had been small. They had brought no trouble. Nancy was normal. And now one son was leaving to serve his wife was not well in his head. What is this old age? Dad, what are you standing there for? Robert called him. I'm coming. He got off the pole and sat down with everyone at the table. All right, guys, it's getting late. We gotta split up. Mother saw that Kevin wasn't himself again. I'll meet everyone at the station tomorrow, shouted Robert. The boy couldn't sleep at night. He heard that where he was going was scary. All sorts of thoughts came into his head. Son, wake up. His mom woke him up in the morning. Yes, he opened his eyes now. Nancy was preparing his bag for the road. John was supervising the process. Robert washed his face, got dressed, and was ready to go to the station. Hey, the girls were already there. Friends were pulling up. Robert climbed into the cabin. One of the guys went with him to walk him straight to the station and wave goodbye. And we're in. The girls got in the seat too. Goodbye. Take care of yourself. Nancy hugged her son. Good luck. Shook the father's hand. He was holding back tears. Everyone by, do not change dashing and write for the last time. Waved the guy from the bus window. And they didn't drive. Everyone was silent. The guy looked out the window as if he wanted to memorize how beautiful it was here. Tears stood in his eyes, but he couldn't show that to anyone. The son left. The mother sat at home at the table. She did not understand how she would survive parting with him. And let's go as blue. Her husband came up to her. Let's go. She stood up. The neighbor was always glad to see them. She set the table as she always did, and they sat down to talk. How is your health? The woman asked Nancy. I'm fine, Nancy shrugged. But her husband and Molly noticed that she was starting to act a little worse. Good, they didn't bring it up again. After a brief sit-down, the husband and wife went home. Nancy took her seat at the table again. For some reason, she had been taking it lately and could sit there for hours. Where are Kevin and Miranda? She turned to her husband. I don't know, out somewhere. John shrugged. I'm worried about her. Why is she always walking with him? The woman told of her worries. On the other hand, it's a good thing. He's her older brother. Protection, so to speak. John tried to change her mind, and they heard some grumbling outside the window. What's that? Nancy looked out. I don't know, can't you see? Her husband asked her. Not yet. The woman remembered what Kevin had told her about the motorcycle. She got up from her seat. Let's go. John took her hand. They went outside the gate just as Kevin pulled up there on his motorcycle. Miranda was sitting on the back. Did you buy it after all? Was the man inspecting the iron horse? Yes, I can ride it around the village now, the boy said proudly. Oh, son, be careful. His mother came up to him. It's all right. He hugged her. Where did you look at her daughter? Mom, why can't I? Did Miranda resent not being allowed to hang out with her brother? All right. Just please be careful. She kissed the girl. The motorcycle started up again, and the young people raced off into the distance. Do you think she looked up at her husband? I don't know, he shrugged. Time passed. Robert wrote letters. His father, when he received them at the post office, read them to his wife first. He was just afraid that his son would write something exciting, and Nancy would immediately feel bad. Look at the letter again. He came home. The woman smiled. She waited every day for word from her son, and her husband would read it aloud, omitting some details, and then they would write a reply together. One day the dreadful letter arrived. Robert wrote that he was on his way to a hot spot. His father did not understand why he made such a decision, but he could not do anything. Naturally, he said nothing. He himself first wrote a reply together with his wife, and then from myself, I will send to the post office. He showed her the envelopes. Good, she nodded and smiled. John decided not to say anything about his brother so he wouldn't blab. On the way back, he stopped by Vanessa's. Hi, why are you alone? She was surprised. We need to talk. He sat down at the table. Okay, what's up? What about the village too? Robert wrote, said he was going to a hot spot. The woman was the only person he told about it. Oh, really? She put her hand over her mouth. I don't know. Nancy didn't say anything and don't say anything. He brought his finger to his lips. Of course, she nodded. They sat for a while longer, discussing the latest news, and John went home. Father is there. Robert's friends are calling us to go for a ride. Shouted from afar. Kevin, are you sure you can handle it? Dad's worried. Of course, you've seen me ride. Just ace, he cocked his head. Miranda, why don't you stay home? Not even asked, but insisted the man. No, what would be so interesting there? She took a tighter grip on her brother. Okay, but don't tell Mom, asked John. The boys left, and he went into the house. Who were you talking to in there? Sitting in her seat at the bar. Let's go to bed. He called his wife. It's so early. She looked at her watch. It's all right, just to lie down. He took her hand and led her to the bedroom. They lay down and talked for a long time and soon fell asleep. Kevin and Miranda met the boys at the edge of the village. Only 4 of them had motorcycles. They were going to go to the track and compete. What's up? Who's first? Asked one of the guys. I raised my hand to Kevin. All right, I'll go with you. The friends clammed up. I'm in. Miranda asked her brother. No, what are you going to do there? Very fast. He talked her out of it. The boys got into position and set off. They raced parallel to each other. Kevin won because he was really going very fast. Well, you're good, said and shook hands with the one he was competing with. I can shake hands with the competitor. Kevin. Then one pair and the other took turns riding. Each time, someone would win, and then the winners would compete. There were only 2 left, the ones who rode the fastest, Kevin being one of them. Cheers, he shouted. His friends all hooted, and the boys got on their horses and rode into the wind. Kevin, you're doing great. Ran up to him one of the girls. Miranda stood aside. She was offended at her brother for bringing her here and not paying attention to her. She turned away from everyone. Sis, what are you doing? Did her brother come up to her? Not even a single ride on the asphalt. It's all about the countryside. She never turned around. Get in. Now you've passed like a winner's circle of honor. He looked back. His friends were already leaving. True, she looked at him. Sure enough, he went to his bike, got on it. Miranda nestled in the back. She hugged her brother tightly as before. Where are you going? Surprised. The rest of your friends. Rolling sis. He waved to them. He borrowed something, said Miranda, and they rushed down the pavement. There were no pats and bumps now. Everything was smooth. Not seconds after they pulled off, a truck showed up ahead. The friends saw Kevin start to wiggle. What was happening to him? Maybe he got spooked by a big oncoming car. He probably wanted to turn around. A thump, a thud, and a scream. And then silence. After a small stupor, Those who had been watching all this shouted there. The guys rushed over, but there was nothing they could do. Kevin was lying in an unnatural position on the road, Miranda in the other direction on the grass. "The girl's still alive," shouted the truck driver. He radioed for an ambulance. The ambulance had to wait for a while. Miranda was alive. She was very badly bruised, but she was breathing, unlike her brother. And John and Nancy had been asleep for some time when the windows and doors began to bang. "Who's that?" The man woke up. He went to the doors, opened them, and there was a struggle that nearly swept him off his feet. Uncle John, Kevin, Miranda. They screamed at each other. "Calm down. Explain what happened." He stared, dazed-eyed. Kevin crashed. "Miranda's alive. She's in the hospital." That's when the wife showed up on the doorstep. She fainted as soon as she heard it. "Get out," John shouted at the young men. Nancy ran up to his wife. He lifted her in his arms and put her on the sofa. He went to call Molly while he was out. "What again?" He woke her up too. "They say Kevin crashed his motorcycle with Miranda." Quietly, he muttered to the bulging eyes of his neighbor, "I don't know what's wrong with them." But Nancy heard it all. "She's not feeling well right now." He watered her down for a half. When Molly left for John and Nancy's house, John ran to the village hall to make a phone call. The ambulance did not come quickly. Nancy never regained consciousness. They took her away. John went with her to the hospitals. He reliably learned that his son was no longer alive, and his daughter was in intensive care in extremely serious condition. He had not been told anything at all about his wife yet. John sat in the hallway. He was crying. A doctor came over to him, sat down next to him. "I think your wife has gotten worse, but she's hanging in there. Probably doesn't believe it yet," he said. "Yes." John shook his head. "You can pick her up tomorrow morning. The pills will be given to her at the funeral." Handed John the doctor a packet. "Thank you." He didn't know what else to say. "I hope everything will be all right." The doctor got up and walked down the hall. John slept right there in the hallway on the couch. In the morning, he walked in to see Nancy. She was looking at him with eyes that were so scary. "Where's Kevin?" She asked him in the voice she used to speak to him before his illness. At the morgue, her husband wouldn't lie. "Why? Why him?" she cried. John printed out the package and gave it to his wife. She obediently drank the pill. And Miranda, she couldn't hold back her tears. "She's in the hospital. She's doing fine." The husband lied. They didn't spend much more time in the hospital, and then they took their son's body and drove to the village. After the pills Dr. Nancy had given John, she was impenetrable. She was doing something, but she was like a doll. No emotion, nothing at all. The funeral was peaceful. The mother sat by her son's coffin and cried quietly. Everyone felt sorry for her. Molly did not understand how she had not yet lost her mind. It had happened herself. "We have to go to the hospital to see Miranda," said John Neighbors. "When is it over?" "You go, and I'll stay with Nancy," she answered him. John did what he could. But Miranda outlived her brother by only 8 days. He sat there crying, didn't know what to do. Then the man made a strong-willed decision. He took his daughter's body, arranged for cremation, paid the money. He drove to the village with a small vessel containing Miranda's ashes. He dug it up for his son in the cemetery. "Already back?" Vanessa asked him. "Yes, I have good news for you," said the man, making a happy face. "And what is that?" Nancy, when she wasn't on the pill, was she sane? "Miranda has been taken to a Moscow clinic to recover there." He smiled. "That's good. Let the girl get well," Nancy said. "Do they send children away without their parents?" Molly questioned. "What kind of child is she?" 12 years old. He put his finger to John's lips to keep her quiet. "I see," nodded the neighbor. She didn't know the truth yet. They all sat together. Father's heart was breaking with grief, and he could not even cry. In the evening, when he went to see the neighbor off, he told her everything. She looked at him with big eyes. "John, where have you been?" Nancy looked at him. She wasn't like she used to be. Out in the yard, he told her. And a month later, the thing everyone feared happened. John was at work. A man came up to him. He said there was a mailman waiting for him outside. What came out? He said he was sorry. He put a telegram in his hand. His son was being taken home in a zinc coffin. No, he fell to his knees, then got up and caught up with the man. Please don't tell anyone. My wife would go crazy if she found out. He begged the man. I'm not supposed to, the man replied. What did the comrade come up to him? Nothing. He folded the paper and put it in his pocket. Molly grieved. He fled to her house, not even knocking. What again was she no longer surprised? Robert couldn't have gotten any further with John. It couldn't be. She looked out the window. Tomorrow, I'll go to town to get the body, he said and sobbed like a child. She supported him in everything, said she would do what he said. John came to town, arranged a car, said that he needed to transport building materials to the villages he wanted to annex to make. Agreed on a price. He came to the military enlistment office. There they offered him that the funeral would be at the expense of the state with an honor guard. But the man refused. You see, this is my situation. He told them that we'll bury his son quietly. All right, that's your business, the man in the uniform told him. He threw a tarp over the coffin, told the driver he'd loaded everything up, and off they went. Why didn't the man behind the wheel at night understand? It just happened, John shrugged. They pulled up in front of his house. The streets were deserted, and only Molly was standing at her gate watching to make sure no one went. 2 local strays were prepared to help the man. They walked from the back alley and dragged the coffin into the yard. Here, Molly handed them some more money. That's it, thank you. Go inside. He waved his hand. What do you smell like? Nancy said when he came back to her. I don't know. He pretended to sniff his hands. We should get the bathhouse heated. The wife got up and went into the kitchen. John did as she wanted. They washed up and came back into the house. You don't know why Robert hasn't written for so long. No letters from politics either. Nancy asked her husband. He'll be here tomorrow for sure, John said. He realized he'd missed the point. When Nancy was busy, he would sit in the other room and write, and then go outside and pretend to get something out of the drawer. And then he and his wife would read together. Oh, what have we done? A mother should know everything about her children, Molly told him. I'll get her out of here, said the man. And the sin is on me. I dropped my son's coffin in the cesspool the other day. I covered it up, but it wasn't human. You're out of your mind, putting your hand on Molly's chest. That's what happened. I can't fix it yet. Nancy will understand. And I moved the toilet a little bit. So he's lying next to us, John said, as if justifying himself for what he'd done. John started drinking because he couldn't bear the grief. At some point he couldn't stand it, went to the barn, and there he laid his hands on himself. And in the morning, when she couldn't find him in the bar, she went out into the yard, and the barn doors were open. She looked in and passed out. I noticed it all too late, when she was on the ground. I ran out, and there was a picture of Molly talking. That's quite a story. Stephen was sitting there looking at her. We took Nancy to the hospital then, and John buried her, and she left there to live here so there would be no questions. She was crying tears that were already visible. Where is Nancy now? Stephen asked her. She was in the clinic for a couple of months, and then she was transferred to a specialized center, answered the old woman. I see there was a family, and then there wasn't. Stephen shook his head. He looked out the window. It was already light. He realized that he had been sitting here all night. Okay, I'm gonna go. He got up, and I'm not afraid to die now. Did you speak? She looked at the man. Come on, you'll live a long time. He shook her hand and left. He decided to walk home. It would give him time to think it over. He walked along the road and could not imagine how people could have such a fate. It did not fit in his head. He reached the house in the village quickly. In an hour there was a bus to the city. I wanted to take it. I went to the station, bought tickets and went. Camille, it's me, he shouted from the doorstep. What's so early? She rolled over onto her other side. But when the man began to tell her about what he had learned tonight, the sleep was lifted from her, and she sat up in bed and Morgana. And what do you think? He asked her. We should call the police and bury the guy. That's fine, she said. I was thinking the same thing. Stephen looked at his watch. The husband and wife had been out of the house since morning. They were in a hurry to get to the department. Hello. We're here about the coffin that was found in the vegetable garden next to the cesspool, said Stephen to the officer on duty. Come in. He pointed them in the right direction. They entered the investigator's office, told him everything they knew. He sat there, his face tightening more and more. Do you believe it? He asked. Well, how could I not, if all the evidence is there? Now it was Stephen's turn to be surprised. All the paperwork had been filled out. It was agreed that the motorcade would be organized. It was also agreed that Stephen and Camille would now leave the department. I want to find Nancy. The man looked at his wife. Good. Where do we start? She didn't understand. He got a car from the hospital, and they drove off. Hello. I'd like to get any information about Nancy. He went to the front desk. Now the girl started going through the computer. Oh, here we go. Who are you? She stared at the couple. I'm the brother-in-law, the man added. Good. She told them what clinic she was in now. Stephen and Camille drove to the clinic for the mentally ill. They walked up to the gate. They had to fill out a bunch of paperwork to get in. They were met by Dr. Stephen. Everyone explained to him that he hadn't seen his sister in a long time. She had disappeared somewhere. And now he'd found her. He understood him, turned around and showed him the direction. She's always sitting by the window reading something on paper, the doctor said. All right, thank you. They went where the man directed them. Nancy was indeed sitting by the window. There were several envelopes lying on the windowsill. They were so shabby you could see they were more than 1 year old and were constantly being opened. Nancy called out to her gently, Man, you are my man. She turned around. The look was indifferent. Yes, you, he nodded. What did you want? She stood up and walked over to them. Tomorrow your son will be buried in the village. Will you come with us? I asked her if my son was alive. Every week he writes me letters. She showed them to strangers. So you don't want to. You realize, Stephen, that all this is useless. No, she shook her head, went and sat down in her seat. Stephen and Camille realized that there was nothing more for them to do here. They walked towards the exit. John, did they hear Nancy's voice? That the man had turned around. It's true, she asked Stephen, although she thought it was her husband, John. Yes, he nodded. Good. Pick me up from the hospital. I'm coming with you. After she said that, she went down the hall. The doctor's burying her son tomorrow. Can we take her? Stephen asked the man. You know, I can't authorize that. Only if it's in our car and with my brothers. He couldn't help but let the woman go to her son. Okay, that would be even better, nodded the man. Why would you do that? Camille asked her husband. At least let her see all her children together one last time. Stephen himself didn't know why he was doing this. All right, do what you know is right. She agreed. The next day, the car from the hospital and an ordinary car drove to the very village where Nancy had once lived. They went straight to the cemetery. This way. Stephen showed her. They came to the place where Nancy's son and daughter were buried. In the meantime, the girl had also been given a memorial to Kevin. She sat down on the bench. She recognized him. Camille whispered to her husband. Yes, he nodded. And after that, the honor guard lined up. A wooden cross was made with Robert's picture on it, but the woman sat there and didn't move. Only when the shots rang out did she flinch. Are you all right? The man asked her. Yes, I need to go home, in case a letter arrives and I'm not there. Raised her head at Stephen. Good. He looked at his brothers. They got up and put her in the car. Goodbye. waved to them from the window. Woman. Goodbye. Stephen stood and watched with his wife, following the poor woman away in the car. Did she think her life would turn out this way? Camille was crying. No one knows what may happen next. Stephen turned to her. He saw Vanessa's grandmother approaching them. Hello, he shouted aghast to her. She approached the fresh grave and knelt down. That's the neighbor, Camille guessed. Yes, he went in her direction. The stall was brought in. Asked Granny. I wanted her to look at her children. Stephen confessed. And do you think she was relieved? She looked up at him. I don't know. Perhaps he took his wife by the hand and they went to their newly renovated house. What are we going to do? Camille turned to him. Move on. They were already approaching the gate. The woman didn't want to go into the courtyard. Let's call the priest. He'll light up the place. The husband suggested it. That's a good idea. Camille hugged him. So they did. When the neighbors saw all these rituals, they decided to do the same. For a long time, the village gossiped about the coffin Stephen had found. But years later, it was all forgotten. Both Stephen and Camille live happily in the house. The children come to visit them. They don't know the story that happened to them, but maybe someday they'll be told it. Molly died 6 months after all this. Stephen personally organized her funeral. Camille helped him. May all be well with you there. He crossed himself. A man at the grave of Nancy and John's children. Let's go. Camille called out to him. They went home, and they tried not to remember the story again.